Wrap yourself in blankets and prepare to time travel into the freezing fog of Victorian London. The year is 1847. The city lies under a pale grey sky, its streets shivering beneath a curtain of mist. The gas lamps flicker weakly, their light swallowed by the smog. Footsteps echo softly on cobblestone lanes, and the air tastes of coal dust and cold iron. Somewhere in the haze, a bell tolls, slow and distant, marking another long winter night. This is not the London of grand balls or fine carriages. It is the London of the forgotten, the chimney boys, the flower girls, the night watchmen, and the match sellers who huddle near doorways, trying to keep their fingers alive long enough to sell a few sticks before dawn. And among them is Sarah. She is 12 years old, her hair the color of wheat ash, tied back with a frayed ribbon that once was red. Her boots have holes, and her breath curls into clouds as she walks through Whitechapel's narrow lanes. Every few steps she coughs, pulling her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. The basket she carries is half empty, a few matchboxes, wrapped in cheap paper, the rest already sold to people richer and warmer than she can imagine. She stops beside a lamppost, where the gas flame hisses softly. The glow paints her face in gold and gray. Behind her, a carriage rattles past, splashing muddy snow onto the curb. Sarah doesn't flinch. She's used to it. The city moves around her like a dream she's not part of. London in winter is cruel to the poor. Coal is scarce and expensive, water freezes in the pumps, the Thames smells of soot and sewage. The cold seeps into every crack, into bones, into lungs. In the alleyways, people wrap newspapers around their legs. In the workhouses, children sleep three to a bed, breathing each other's warmth. Sarah remembers warmth as something far away, a feeling that belonged to her mother's lap, long before the fever took her. Her father, once a dock worker, spends his nights now in gin houses, promising each morning that things will be better by spring. But spring always feels like another lifetime. Tonight, the wind carries a strange stillness. The city seems to hold its breath. Even the river has slowed, its surface crusted with thin sheets of ice. Sarah walks toward the bridge, where she knows a baker sometimes tosses out crumbs when closing up shop. She doesn't beg, she's too proud for that, but she lingers, pretending to look at the lights. A man passes her, tall, wrapped in a heavy coat and scarf. He doesn't look at her. Most don't. The rich have their own kind of blindness in winter, they keep their eyes ahead, as if sympathy itself might chill them. But then, just as he reaches the corner, he stops. Turns. And walks back. "You shouldn't be out here, little one," he says gently. His voice is muffled, kind. "You'll freeze." Sarah lifts her chin. "I have matches, sir." He looks at the small bundle in her hands, and something in his expression softens. He buys 2 boxes, pays her a shilling instead of a penny. She blinks, unsure whether to thank him or cry. "Find a warm place," he murmurs, before disappearing again into the fog. Sarah tucks the coin into her pocket. For a moment, she imagines a pie from the corner stall, or a spot by the baker's oven. But she knows she should save it. The shilling means another day's rent in the cellar room she shares with her father. Another night not sleeping under a bridge. As she walks on, snow begins to fall, slow, feathery flakes that settle on her hair and lashes. They look almost beautiful in the lamplight, like tiny stars. London is quieter now. Even the clatter of hooves seems far away. Somewhere near Fleet Street, a church choir is practicing for Christmas. Their faint voices drift through the fog, thin and haunting, in the bleak midwinter. Sarah stops to listen. She closes her eyes and lets the sound carry her. For a few moments, she isn't cold, or hungry, or alone. She is simply a girl, standing in the snow, listening to hope disguised as song. The city around her is layered with lives, thousands of small stories like hers, all unfolding at once. The seamstress who stitches until her fingers bleed by candlelight. The boy who sweeps chimneys until the soot burns his lungs. The ragpicker who dreams of owning a pair of shoes that fit. Each of them survives another day, another frost, another night of breath turning white in the air. By dawn, the city will wake again to its endless hum, markets opening, wheels turning, voices rising from the fog. But for now, London sleeps beneath its winter blanket, dreaming of warmth. Sarah reaches home, a damp basement room that smells of mildew and coal smoke. Her father lies on a cot, snoring faintly, an empty bottle beside him. She tiptoes past, sets down her basket, and counts her coins by the flicker of a candle stub. The flame wavers. She blows on her fingers, then lies down, curling into herself for warmth. The candle burns out. The room grows dark. Outside, the city exhales, a sigh of frost against brick and glass. Somewhere, a clock strikes 4. And still, through the cold and silence, life persists. In another part of London, a carriage door closes. Inside sits the man who bought Sarah's matches, Mr. Henry Alden, a clerk for the city council. His gloves are still cold from the night air. But his mind is restless. The image of the girl lingers, her pale hands, her steady eyes. He knows what winter does to children like her. His own childhood wasn't so different, though he's long hidden that truth beneath layers of respectability. He remembers sleeping in workhouse beds, sharing crusts with boys who vanished by spring. He remembers hunger, the kind that lives behind your ribs, whispering that life is unfair but still worth clinging to. As his carriage rolls past the river, Henry looks out at the icy water. He wonders how many are sleeping under that bridge tonight. In the morning, he makes a decision. He will start a small fund, a modest charity, perhaps, for chimney sweeps and match sellers. It won't change the world, but it might keep a few hands warm. He doesn't know that one of those hands will belong to Sarah. But that is for later. For now, London shivers on, a city of gaslight and snow, of hunger and quiet grace. The kind of city that tests its people, yet never quite breaks them. In every flicker of a lamp, in every footstep echoing through the fog, there is a heartbeat. A reminder that even in the darkest, coldest hours, humanity endures. And as the morning light creeps through the smog, turning the frost to silver, Sarah stirs in her sleep. A faint smile touches her lips, a dream of warmth, perhaps. Or maybe of spring morning crept slowly over London, the kind of pale, tired morning that never truly brightens. The fog still hung low, and the streets glistened with last night's frost. Cartwheels left dark tracks on the cobblestones, and the air smelled faintly of smoke and wet wool. For most of the city, the new day meant work, long hours, cold fingers, and a kind of quiet endurance that Londoners learned young. In a cramped room beneath the bridge, Sarah stirred awake. Her breath hung in little white clouds above her face. Her shawl had slipped from her shoulders during the night, and the chill had settled deep into her bones. She reached for the basket beside her, her livelihood, her only anchor, and ran her small hands over the matchboxes inside, as though counting blessings. The world outside was already stirring. Somewhere nearby, a woman shouted for her son to hurry, a milk cart creaked past, its bell tinkling faintly. Sarah pulled on her boots, stiff and cracked with age, and stepped out into the biting air. Her fingers, already numb, ached as she adjusted the shawl around her neck. Another day, she thought. Another day to sell, to walk, to hope. Across the city, Henry Alden was also awake, earlier than usual. His modest house on Gray's Inn Road was still quiet, save for the gentle ticking of the clock and the occasional crackle of coal in the grate. He sat by the fire, staring into it, his mind still caught on the image of the girl from the night before. The fog had blurred her face, but not her eyes, calm, resigned, too old for 12. He had seen many such faces growing up in the poorer districts of Southwark, before he'd managed to rise through the civil ranks. Yet something about that girl, Sarah, lingered. Perhaps it was the way she'd stood there in the cold without complaint. Or maybe it was the simple truth that, for all his comfort now, he was once closer to her world than to the fine men he dined with. He reached for his pen. The ink trembled slightly in the chill. He began to write. Morning crept slowly over London, the kind of pale, tired morning that never truly brightens. The fog still hung low, and the streets glistened with last night's frost. Cartwheels left dark tracks on the cobblestones, and the air smelled faintly of smoke and wet wool. For most of the city, the new day meant work, long hours, cold fingers, and a kind of quiet endurance that Londoners learned young. In a cramped room beneath the bridge, Sarah stirred awake. Her breath hung in little white clouds above her face. Her shawl had slipped from her shoulders during the night, and the chill had settled deep into her bones. She reached for the basket beside her, her livelihood, her only anchor, and ran her small hands over the matchboxes inside, as though counting blessings. The world outside was already stirring. Somewhere nearby, a woman shouted for her son to hurry, a milk cart creaked past, its bell tinkling faintly. Sarah pulled on her boots, stiff and cracked with age, and stepped out into the biting air. Her fingers, already numb, ached as she adjusted the shawl around her neck. Another day, she thought. Another day to sell, to walk, to hope. Across the city, Henry Alden was also awake, earlier than usual. His modest house on Gray's Inn Road was still quiet, save for the gentle ticking of the clock and the occasional crackle of coal in the grate. He sat by the fire, staring into it, his mind still caught on the image of the girl from the night before. The fog had blurred her face, but not her eyes, calm, resigned, too old for 12. He had seen many such faces growing up in the poorer districts of Southwark, before he'd managed to rise through the civil ranks. Yet something about that girl, Sarah, lingered. Perhaps it was the way she'd stood there in the cold without complaint. Or maybe it was the simple truth that, for all his comfort now, he was once closer to her world than to the fine men he dined with. He reached for his pen. The ink trembled slightly in the chill. He began to write. Proposal, relief fund for street children, winter distribution of coal, blankets, and bread. Sarah looked up, startled. Recognition flickered in her eyes. "It's you," she whispered. Henry smiled gently. "And it's you, the matchgirl." She lowered her gaze. "Thank you for the shilling, sir. I found a warm place last night." "I'm glad." He hesitated, unsure how to bridge the worlds between them. "Tell me, do you work every day?" She nodded. "Every day the weather lets me. If I don't sell, we don't eat." There was no complaint in her tone, only fact. Henry felt something tighten in his chest. "Would you come back here tomorrow evening?" he asked. "There will be warm soup again, and perhaps, a bit of work to help us give food to others." Her eyes widened slightly. "Work?" He smiled. "Yes. Helping hands are always needed. And you'd be paid, of course." Sarah hesitated, torn between disbelief and longing. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you, sir." That night, as she walked home, she felt something she hadn't in a long time, anticipation. The cold was still bitter, the streets still merciless, but for once, tomorrow didn't feel hopeless. When she returned to the cellar, her father was awake. The bottle was gone. In its place lay a quiet guilt in his eyes. "You done well today?" he asked softly. Sarah smiled faintly. "I think so, father. I met a kind man. He said there might be work, warm work." Her father nodded, staring at the flickering candle. "Good. That's good, love." Outside, snow began to fall again, heavier this time, swirling past the window cracks like ghostly feathers. But Sarah didn't mind. She wrapped herself in her shawl, closed her eyes, and let sleep take her. The next day dawned even colder. The frost on the windows looked like lace, and the air was thick with chimney smoke. Yet Sarah's steps were lighter as she made her way to the parish hall. She found Henry there already, sleeves rolled up, helping the priest unload baskets of coal. When he saw her, he smiled. "Ah, Miss Sarah. Right on time." She blushed. No one had ever called her miss before. He handed her a small apron and showed her how to ladle soup into bowls. She worked quietly, carefully, her fingers trembling not from cold but from nerves. Dozens of poor families filed in, old men with canes, mothers with babies, children with eyes like shadows. And yet, for a few hours, the hall was full of warmth. Steam rose from the pots, laughter echoed faintly, and the smell of bread and broth filled the air. Henry watched Sarah move among them, shy, gentle, patient, and he thought to himself that this, perhaps, was what goodness looked like. Not grand gestures, not wealth, but small kindness done by small hands. When the last bowl was served, Sarah helped sweep the floor. Henry handed her a small envelope. "For your work," he said. She opened it. Inside were 2 shillings and a folded note that read, "Come again tomorrow. You are needed here." Tears welled in her eyes. "Thank you, sir." "Thank you," he replied softly. That night, as London slept under another blanket of snow, 2 lives, one forged in comfort, the other in hardship, had quietly begun to change the shape of winter itself. The fog still crept through the alleys, the river still froze at its edges, and countless others still struggled to stay warm. But in one small corner of the city, a flicker of hope burned. And sometimes, in history, that's all it takes, a single light in the fog. The days passed slowly, one cold breath at a time. January settled upon London like a heavy quilt of grey. Frost glazed the rooftops, the river lay silent beneath its thin crust of ice, and the streets moved with the weary rhythm of survival. Yet, within the small parish near Whitechapel, something had begun to change. The soup kitchen had become a gathering place, not just for the hungry, but for those who still believed in gentleness. Each evening, faint laughter mingled with the hiss of boiling pots. Children came not only to eat but to talk, to be seen, to remember they were still part of the living world. Sarah worked there every day now. Her hands, once trembling with cold, had grown steadier ladling soup, sweeping floors, carrying coal. She'd learned the rhythm of warmth, how kindness flowed from one person to another, slow and steady like a hidden stream beneath ice. Henry often arrived early, bringing papers, ledgers, and sometimes extra loaves from a sympathetic baker. He never spoke of charity as duty. To him, it was simply what people ought to do for one another. Yet each time he watched Sarah smiling faintly as she served an old man or tied a blanket around a child, something softened inside him, an old ache that no longer hurt but glowed quietly. One evening, as the fog rolled in thick and white, the hall's fire burned low. The priest had left early to visit a sick parishioner, leaving Sarah and Henry to close up. Sarah knelt by the hearth, stacking the last bits of coal. The flames flickered, catching her face in warm gold. Henry watched her quietly. "You've done well, Sarah," he said. She looked up. "It's strange," she murmured. "The more I help here, the less the cold seems to matter." He nodded slowly. "That's often how it is. The heart warms the hands even when the air doesn't." For a moment, the only sound was the crackle of coal. Then Sarah spoke softly, almost to herself. "I used to think winter was a punishment," she said. "Like the city wanted to remind us we didn't belong. But now," she paused, gazing at the flame. "Now I think maybe winter just shows us who still has a little warmth to give." Henry felt a quiet shiver at her words. "That's beautifully said," he whispered. "You've more wisdom than most grown men I know." Sarah smiled shyly. "I only know what the cold has taught me." Outside, the fog thickened, curling around the windows. Somewhere far off, the sound of church bells drifted, soft, ghostly, counting the hours. They worked in silence for a while longer. Then Henry offered to walk her home. The streets were nearly empty, the gas lamps glowed like distant stars. Snowflakes floated down, landing on Sarah's shawl like threads of silver. As they crossed the bridge, Henry spoke again, his voice low. "The fund is growing," he said. "We've gathered enough to buy coal for 20 families this month. And blankets for the workhouse children." Sarah looked up, her eyes bright. "Truly?" "We made it through another winter." And indeed, they had. But though the season was ending, its lessons would remain, that even in the darkest months, humanity could glow like a candle in endless fog. The days began to stretch again. The pale sun lingered longer over the rooftops, melting the last thin layers of ice that clung to the cobblestones. London's winter was loosening its grip, but its memory still clung to every wall, every breath. Sarah woke one morning to birdsong, faint, uncertain, but real. It drifted through the cracked window of her cellar room, carrying with it the smell of damp earth and distant bakeries. She sat up slowly, wrapped her shawl tighter, and smiled. The cold no longer felt endless. Her father was already gone for the day, his boots leaving muddy prints near the door. He had begun working nights at the docks and sleeping through the afternoons. His voice was calmer now, his eyes clearer. Sometimes he even hummed when he came home, a tune Sarah remembered from when her mother was alive. Sarah tidied the small space, folding blankets, sweeping ash from the small hearth, then lifted her basket. She still sold matches in the mornings, though not from desperation anymore, but habit. The extra coins she earned she now shared, sometimes with the street singer who always bowed in gratitude, sometimes with the children who huddled by the bridge. As she stepped outside, the sky was bright, a soft blue veiled with smoke. The smell of spring hung faintly, coal and thawing mud and the sweetness of blooming crocuses from Covent Garden. She made her way to the parish by midday, where Henry and the priest were sorting parcels for delivery, small sacks of coal, loaves, and second-hand coats. "Good morning, Sarah," Henry greeted her, his smile warm. "You brought the light with you today." She laughed softly. "It's just the sun, sir. It's been shy for too long." He chuckled, handing her a list. "We're delivering to Bishopsgate today. A few old widows and some children who've been down with the cough." Sarah nodded eagerly. She had learned the city by heart now, each street, each face, each quiet story hidden behind a door. They loaded the cart, its wooden wheels creaking softly. Henry took the reins, and Sarah rode beside him, holding her shawl against the wind. London unfolded around them, narrow alleys where washing lines fluttered, shopkeepers sweeping stoops, children chasing each other through puddles. The city was waking up again. Their first stop was an old widow named Mrs. Hensley, who lived in a one-room attic that smelled of lavender and dust. She thanked them with trembling hands and pressed a piece of bread into Sarah's palm for kindness returned. At the next house, a mother of three opened the door, her youngest clinging to her skirt. Her eyes shone with tears as she took the coal. "God bless you," she whispered. Sarah smiled shyly. "We just bring what others gave," she said. Henry watched her as they walked back to the cart. "You speak like an old soul," he murmured. Sarah tilted her head. "Maybe the cold makes us grow up quicker." He nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe it does." They moved from street to street until the cart was empty, the last parcels delivered. As they returned through the fog-laced lanes, Sarah leaned back against the cart and watched the sky. The light was softer now, golden along the rooftops. "Do you ever think," she asked quietly, "that London could be beautiful if only people saw it that way?" Henry smiled. "It already is, Sarah. It's just that beauty here hides beneath the soot, like stars behind the fog." She thought about that for a while, smiling faintly. By evening, the parish hall glowed with candlelight. Families came to thank them, children giggled as they received slices of bread, and somewhere, someone began to sing softly, a lullaby, slow and wistful. Sarah hummed along as she swept the floor. The air was filled with warmth, the kind that wasn't from coal or fire but from people simply being kind to one another. When everyone had left, Henry lingered, leaning against the doorframe. "You've become the heart of this place," he said quietly. Sarah looked up, startled. "Me?" "Yes," he said. "You remind everyone why we're here." She blushed. "I only do what I can." "That's exactly what makes it remarkable," he replied. Outside, the lamps flickered in the twilight. The streets, though still cold, felt gentler now, as if the city itself had sighed in relief. Spring soon arrived fully, timid but true. Green leaves unfurled along the riverbanks, and the air filled with the hum of new life. Sarah began helping at the parish school on days when the soup kitchen wasn't needed, teaching younger children to read simple words. She remembered how she'd once longed for such a chance, and now she gave it to others. Henry watched from afar, proud but humble. He had no children of his own, no family left to claim him, yet he felt a sense of belonging he hadn't known before. The fund had grown larger than he'd imagined. Gentlemen from the council now donated discreetly, factories sent old blankets, and seamstresses offered scraps of fabric that Sarah stitched into tiny coats. The city, in its quiet way, had begun to heal itself. One mild afternoon, Sarah found herself walking through St. James's Park. The lake shimmered under the sun, and the trees rustled softly in the breeze. She sat on a bench, her basket beside her, watching children chase pigeons across the grass. It struck her how much had changed, how far she'd come from that night in the freezing fog. She no longer felt invisible. She belonged to something, to kindness, to community, to hope. A familiar voice called her name. Henry approached, carrying a small envelope. "I have something for you," he said, handing it to her. She opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, written in careful script, offering her a place at a new charity school opening in Bloomsbury. "You'll study," Henry said softly. "Proper lessons, reading, writing, arithmetic. They'll even teach sewing and bookkeeping." Sarah's eyes widened. "Me? Truly?" "Truly," he said. "You've earned it." Her lips trembled. "I don't know what to say." He smiled gently. "Say you'll go." She nodded slowly, tears bright in her eyes. "I'll go." For a long moment, they sat in silence, watching the sunlight dance on the water. A soft breeze stirred the air, carrying the scent of lilac and earth. "Do you know," Henry said at last, "that the winter we just endured was said to be one of the coldest in years? And yet, when I think of it now, I don't remember the frost. I remember people, you, the children, the laughter in that hall." Sarah smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what warmth really means," she said. "When the memory of kindness lasts longer than the memory of cold." Henry nodded. "Exactly that." As the sun dipped low, casting long golden shadows over the park, Sarah looked toward the horizon and whispered, "We made it through, didn't we?" Henry smiled. "Yes, Sarah. We did." And somewhere in the distance, church bells began to chime, not the cold, hollow tolls of winter, but the soft, hopeful melody of spring. London, beneath its soot and smoke, glowed quietly. Life went on, gentler, kinder, warmer than before. Years passed, and London changed. The city that once groaned beneath the soot of endless chimneys began to breathe again. Gas lamps burned brighter, new bridges rose across the Thames, and trains carried people farther than they'd ever imagined going. Yet in the quiet corners, down narrow lanes and hidden courtyards, the old London still lingered, whispering its stories to those who cared to listen. Sarah grew with it. She studied hard at the charity school, her fingers once cracked from cold now ink-stained from books. The letters that once blurred before her eyes became familiar friends, doors into other worlds. She learned to read Dickens and the Bible, to write her name with pride. Each new word felt like a spark of light against the darkness she'd known. By her 15th birthday, Sarah was teaching younger children, the same age she'd been when she sold matches by gaslight. Her voice was soft but steady, her patience endless. The children adored her. They called her Miss Sarah with the warm eyes. Henry still visited often, though his hair had turned more silver than brown. The parish continued to run its soup kitchen each winter, though the crowds were smaller now. There were more charities, more reformers, more hope. London's heart was still rough and weary, but it beat with a little more kindness. One evening, years later, Sarah walked home through a light snowfall. The city glowed golden through the mist, and the sound of carolers drifted from the corner of the square. She stopped near a familiar lamp, the very same one where she'd once stood shivering, her basket of matches frozen in her hands. She touched the cold iron post and smiled. The lamp still flickered just as it had then. Only she had changed. A voice broke her reverie. "You'll catch cold standing there, Miss Sarah," Henry called, appearing from the fog with his walking stick. She turned, laughing softly. "I was just remembering. Do you ever think about that winter?" He nodded slowly. Every year when the frost returns, they walked together toward the river. The water shimmered with reflections of light, broken by ripples of snow. "The world feels kinder now," Sarah murmured. Henry smiled faintly. "Perhaps it always wanted to be. It just needed people to remind it how." They reached the small bridge that crossed toward Lambeth, where children were throwing snow into the water, their laughter echoing against the stone arches. Sarah leaned against the railing, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "You know, when I was little, I thought winters would always be cruel. I thought that was just the way the world was." Henry looked at her kindly. "And now?" She watched the flakes fall, soft and slow. "Now I think winter only shows us how strong warmth can be." He nodded approvingly. "That's wisdom hard-earned." For a while they said nothing, only listened to the muffled sounds of hooves, bells, and voices carrying through the mist. Years rolled forward again, gentle and unhurried. Henry passed quietly one winter, his candle burning out like the soft end of a hymn. The parish mourned him with simple grace, flowers, prayers, and a bell that tolled once at dusk. Sarah took his place, not as a preacher, but as the quiet heart of the small mission he had begun. By then, she had a room above the school, small, warm, filled with books and sunlight. Children still came to learn their letters and songs, and every Christmas she told them stories of the old winters, of fog so thick you could lose your hand in it, of fires that never burned bright enough, and of one little girl who sold matches to strangers. The children always leaned forward, eyes wide, until Sarah smiled and said softly, "But someone saw her. Someone cared." And that made all the difference. Sometimes she would pause, gaze out the frosted window, and whisper a prayer for all those still wandering the streets unseen. London, by then, had changed almost beyond recognition. Great fires had cleansed its air, new laws had softened the worst of its poverty. But each year, when the first frost came, Sarah felt that old ache, not of fear, but memory. One evening, as she walked home beneath a pale moon, she heard laughter from a nearby alley, a group of ragged boys tossing snowballs. One of them slipped, and she rushed over to help him up. "Thank you, miss," he said, grinning with a missing tooth. Sarah smiled. "Where are your gloves, young man?" "Don't got none," he said proudly. She removed her mittens and pressed them into his hands. "Now you do." The boy stared, stunned. "But you'll be cold." "I've been cold before," she said gently. "And I know it passes quicker when someone shares their warmth." He nodded solemnly, pulling the mittens on. "I'll remember that." As she walked away, Sarah felt the quiet pulse of life all around her, footsteps, laughter, the creak of wagons, and realized that though the winters would always come, she no longer feared them. The city, harsh and gray, had taught her something deeper, that warmth was not just a season, but a choice. Decades passed. The London fogs grew thinner. Coal gave way to gas, gas to light. New inventions filled the streets, trams, telegraphs, voices carried by wires. The city grew louder, brighter, faster. Yet even amid progress, the cold still found its way into corners, into hearts that forgot kindness. Sarah, now gray-haired, still taught at the same small school. Her steps were slower, her eyes softer. Sometimes she sat by the window during lessons, watching snow fall over rooftops, and thought of Henry, of his calm voice, his steady hands, his faith in goodness. On one especially bitter night, she stayed late to finish a letter for a new charity, a winter fund for orphan children. When the candles burned low, she looked out and saw the fog rolling in again, wrapping the city in white silence. It looked just as it had that night long ago. She smiled faintly. "Full circle," she whispered. The next morning, the parish children found her still in her chair, her pen fallen beside the letter. On the desk were coins, names of donors, and a note that read, "For those who need warmth next winter." London awoke to frost that day, the kind that glitters like crystal on every stone. The bells tolled gently, the same way they always had. And through the quiet fog, people said her name with affection, as if speaking of light. Her students grew up, her school carried on, and her story, like so many others, folded itself into the city's heartbeat. Even now, if you wander through London's older streets in winter, you can still imagine her, a small girl with a basket of matches, walking through the mist. You can almost hear her footsteps fading softly into time. And if you close your eyes, you might hear her voice, faint but steady, reminding you that even in the coldest winter, there is always warmth to be found, if we remember to share it. So, as you lie beneath your blankets tonight, listening to the world grow still, remember them, the chimney boys, the matchgirls, the weary and the brave, who once faced the brutal winters of Victorian London and taught us something timeless. That the frost may bite, the fog may blind, but kindness never freezes.